Good morning. We are about to start. Welcome to track 2. My name is Joel Stradling. I'm a research director at Current Analysis. This morning's track is the NFV and open source track. We have 4 presenters that will talk to us up until a break at 10:20. Then we'll reconvene at 10:50 and have the second part of this morning's sessions that will run up until 12:30 for lunch. So our first session is with Pravin Mirchandani. Pravin is the Chief Marketing Officer at One Access Networks, and he's also responsible for the virtualization strategy. So without further ado, Pravin, please go ahead.
Good morning, everybody. Whoops. I hope we'll have woken you up. So thank you very much for those of you who have made the effort to be here bright and early on this quite sunny Paris morning. So just briefly, my name's Pravin Mirchandani, as Joel just said. I've been working at One Access Networks now for almost 5 years. And certainly for the last 3 years, we have been heavily involved in virtualization in all of its forms. And what I want to do today is to share with you some of the experiences that we've had with various trials, POCs, demos around the world, and hopefully communicate some of the issues and challenges that we've had during the course of that. And at the end of my presentation, which is relatively short, I will give you some guidelines, is probably a strong word, but certain suggestions or pointers as to how to approach demos and trials to make them more efficient for both the operators that are running the trials and indeed for the vendors that are participating in those trials. So, is that the right one? I'm not sure. Okay. Good. So first of all, let's think about the traditional piece of network equipment, the network node. As I'm sure all of you are aware, very monolithic, but it has certain advantages in terms of being tested. The key thing is that everything is in one piece, it's integrated, and particularly it is pre-integrated by the manufacturer or the supplier responsible for that piece of equipment, which makes it simple to test. You can read the spec sheet, you can look at what the attributes of that box are in terms of features, functions, performance, and in particular the performance is quite predictable. It either does what it says on the data sheet or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, you can point to one person, the supplier, the vendor, and say, why doesn't it do what you claim it to do? So when we get to a different type of box, we find that the white box, which is one of the key things that has been trialed around the world, many of these attributes are no longer there. What we're finding is that it has good things. It's versatile, it's open, it's interoperable, it's fairly standard, but because the operators are looking to load different types of functions from different types of vendors on that same box, the issue of integration raises its head. Because we need to make sure that the VNFs run on the host system. We need to make sure that the east-west communications between those VNFs work correctly. We need to make sure that the northbound API, be it netconf or REST or whatever, actually works. And in particular, the performance is very, very unpredictable. And in terms of performance, we're also looking at the resource consumption. Sometimes that is very unpredictable. So a specific VNF could consume a large portion of the available compute and memory resources on that box. And if things don't work, where do you point the finger? Yeah? Is it at the person who supplied the white box? Is it the VNF vendor? Is it the person who supplied the operating system, who could be different? Is it the management platform that can't get the things to work, the VNF manager? There are many different issues to resolve here. It is actually quite an unpredictable and unknown environment. And remember, it's also a relatively immature environment. Very few deployments in the world, if any, and a lot of the code that is being put on these boxes is new and relatively untested. So here's a little, it's not a sketch, but it collects together a couple of experiences that we've had when we've walked into a lab or various labs around the world. And it trying to communicate to you the newness of all of this. So we walked into a couple of labs, and the person that greeted us was expecting somebody else. Said, well, hello, I won't say what the vendors were, but hello, whatever you are, vendor, because maybe their boxes arrived the day before, maybe the planning was wrong, maybe they're trying to juggle too many balls at the same time, and we've had to say, well, actually, we'll want access. Okay, well, come in. We weren't expecting you, but hey, that's cool. You have some technology. So we ask, well, what is it you want to test today? And quite often, because the labs are trying to struggle with so many different issues and so many different technology bricks they're trying to test at the same time, that they don't actually have a formal set of test objectives. They just want to see whether what the vendors are presenting actually works in their target environments. So we reply, well, okay, this is the technology that we have. Okay, well, that's great. Let's come in. Let's test it. But one of the key things that the labs are looking to test is interoperability. Can you work with somebody else? And so one of the key questions that we often get, almost always, is, on your white box, can we test somebody else's VNF? Because apparently, for some of the vendors out there, that's not possible. It's a vertically integrated environment that doesn't allow chaining. But here, they do want to test that. One of the things that we find as a vendor is we need to know what the orchestration environment is. Are you using, Cisco, Blue Planet, Juniper, whoever? And quite often, that is a decision that has not yet been taken. Or if it has been taken, the management system is not yet available. And so one of the things that we bring with us in our pocket always is a NetConf client so that we can actually run the demo or trial. And the lab environment is often quite chaotic, I think is the right word to use. Yeah, a lot of different systems. People are testing different NFVIs. They're testing different virtualization infrastructures, lots and lots of VNFs from different vendors, different platforms, be they server blades with NFVI on, be they white boxes with that embedded NFVI environment. And they're trying to juggle, as I said, all of those balls, test those different things, and in particular, see if different parts of this virtualization world can work together. So why is this happening? Normally, when we walk into a lab with our traditional equipment, it's a very structured environment. The planning is there. There are clear test outcomes that are expected from us. And yet it's the same people running the lab. And clearly, they're not planning to have this chaotic or very difficult environment that we're often confronted with. And I think the reason is that the objectives for the corporation are set very high level. We are going to do this. Virtualization is a strategic objective for the company, and that message is being communicated down into the various organizations within an operator. But each of those organizations within the operator are still relative silos. A lot of communication is obviously happening, but each of those organizations have different objectives, sometimes different agendas. So if we look at the IT department, they're struggling with some of the issues around OSS migration. What are the APIs that they should use? To what extent should they use the legacy OSS that they have? Should they run a new parallel OSS to run the new virtualized functions that they're looking to test? The marketing people are looking obviously for some of the cool objectives surrounding virtualization, service agility, time to market, flexibility in responding to what's happening in their various marketplaces. Can they choose best of breed technology? Those are the types of issues that they're looking at. The product people who typically have a business to run, they need to make sure that the equipment or the functions that they're going to put into the network are reliable, carrier grade. They're looking at issues like openness, making sure that it's interoperable, the different parts can work with each other. They're looking for great automation because that means that they have the flexibility in the marketplace and obviously features. And down, well, maybe not at the bottom, but another silo is the procurement people. The procurement people are seeing virtualization as a wonderful opportunity to compare and contrast and obviously to try and lower prices from the vendors that they acquire from. And they're coming with different procurement templates, looking to make sure that they have a direct comparison between the vendors so that they can create the competition that would allow lower prices to be achieved. But quite often, it's very difficult to do that because every vendor's technology is structured slightly differently. The licensing schemes are quite different. So they are struggling with that. But all of these competing organizations are struggling to achieve their various objectives. Because everything is new, they're also struggling to create those clear goals and outcomes when we go into a lab and test. So those of you who have watched the film or read the book will remember this episode from Alice in Wonderland that Alice asks, where do I go? You really need to know where you want to go in order to be able to get there. And I think one of the problems is although the end goal is there, I think some of the milestones along the way in terms of going towards virtualization are still relatively unclear, and that is leading to some issues. And the other issue that we have is normally when you go into a lab with a piece of traditional equipment, you are just one component that is being changed. Everything else is relatively static, everything else is relatively mature, and it is working. And those of you who are in the testing business will know that that's the ideal environment. You only change one thing and test that. And then if it doesn't work, you can replace that thing and see, or replace some other component and allow it to be tested. And that actually leads to relatively predictable outcomes, or at least relatively testable outcomes, when you're there. And frankly, all of us are in this business in terms of juggling lots of different balls in the air, technology, integration, interoperability, new APIs, new management systems. We're all in the same position. So I think one of the lessons from this is to try and make sure that the environment is as known as possible in advance. Agree a plan and some test outcomes up front. Target a familiar environment for the vendor. Because remember, the vendors, and we are one of them, we're often walking into really unknown environments, new management systems, new NFVIs, new APIs that we have to deal with. And so, as an operator, I would suggest try and work with the vendor to agree an environment that at least they are familiar with initially, And if you haven't chosen your orchestration entity, maybe they can provide one that they already know works.
2 minutes, Pravin.
Thank you. Once you've got that and you've got the vendor's functions up and running, then add the target orchestrator or orchestrators if they are available. If you want to test service chaining, initially test from the same vendor if they have multiple VNFs. And once that works and you've made sure that east-west communications works in the target environment, then you can chain another VNF from a third-party vendor. Don't try and do that too quickly because there are too many issues to solve initially. So make sure that the environment becomes tested, known, and mature before you start to introduce new entities. And then assess if the orchestrator can lifecycle both network functions. And then, if you want, test a different NFV environment with those VNFs. So those are just a couple of things that you should bear in mind. But perhaps the most important thing is to make sure that the experts are on hand. Yeah, the experts from the vendor, your own experts, maybe from the management entity, because there are problems, there are issues, things don't work initially. And if you wait for the normal sort of, this doesn't work, go and fix it, come back, you're going to lose a lot of time. So if you can concentrate the experts into one room and make sure that they can at least identify the issues and what's not working initially, then that will lead to much faster cycles in terms of achieving the test outcomes. So that's pretty much what I have to say.
Thank you very much, Pravin, and well done for keeping the timing accurate. We'd like to open the floor to questions now, and there's a gentleman here at the front, if we could possibly get a microphone. If you wouldn't mind, sir, please introduce yourself.
Yuri Gitikrad. So thanks a lot. I think it's a very true story that you presented. The question, how do you find the white box? Because I think there is a lot of definitions. What do you consider, based on your experience, are the major attributes of the white box?
I think it really depends on what the operator is trying to achieve with the white box. So if they're looking for a specific set of functions that they would like to deliver on that, it's actually relatively easy to specify the white box in terms of memory, performance, acceleration assistance that's available on it. What we do find is that if an operator is looking to put potentially best-of-breed VNFs, in other words, from some of the more specialist vendors out there on the marketplace, most of those VNFs are quite resource hungry. Yeah, they need a lot of compute power, a lot of memory, a lot of storage. And this is actually leading to a slight inflation at certain operators in terms of how that white box is being specified. And obviously, the more you move up the food chain in terms of Intel CPUs in particular, that leads to a price implication. But broadly, the white box that people are looking to put in place is fairly standard, yeah, in terms of the Ethernet interfaces, in terms of the compute resources, but it's in particular the acceleration support mechanisms that are needed for certain types of VNFs that lead to differences, if you like, in terms of the dimensioning of the box. Sorry? No. Yeah.
It's always gray somehow.
It is always gray. Yeah, I think I would agree with that, yeah. Any other
questions? Thank you for that question. Are there any other questions?
Yes, I'm Kumutini. I'm from Juniper. I have a question about the interoperability testing in VNF. Like generally, like if you have Juniper box and Cisco and ALU box, like we do interoperability testing, and there are standard bodies, they conduct this testing and certify, okay, for this piece of protocol, it was tested, and they, like that, is there any such standard bodies for VNF interoperability or service chaining and thing in that domain?
To be honest, not that I'm aware of personally. I know that there are some initiatives to try and standardize the Yang models that are being used amongst vendors. And there are some debates as to whether, A, is that necessary, because it's actually a modeled environment. But what we find is the key issue is the specific northbound and eastbound APIs that are available. That's where the problems tend to occur. And interoperability testing is great, but whenever we go into a lab, we never find what we find in a sort of typical interoperability testing environment. There's always something different. It's a very fast-moving environment, lots of different variables, and each of the operators has quite a different stance on, what is the orchestrator, on controllers that they would like to use, what are the VNFs they want to use, what is their target NFVI environment. It really is a fast-moving environment. So I'm not trying to say that interoperability tests are not useful, they are. But the guidelines that I showed there really suggest that you need to be prepared for the unknown.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, in the interest of time, I think we should move on. So thank you very much, Praveen.
Thank you.